My rich new neighbor moved his fence 6 feet onto my property, destroying my wife's garden. "This is my land now, old man," he sneered. "Sue me if you don't like it." He had no idea that my grandfather, the man who built my house with his bare hands, had left behind a secret buried in the county records office, a secret that was about to turn his multi-million-dollar mansion into ashes. My name is George, and I'm 68 years old. I live in the same house I grew up in, a sturdy, modest home built by my grandfather on a beautiful 2-acre plot of land he bought after the war. For 50 years, the property next to mine was owned by the Hendersons, a quiet, elderly couple who, like my grandparents, cherished the peace and the towering old oak trees that marked our shared property line. When they passed away, their children sold the property, and that's when Mr. Alistair Davenport arrived. Davenport wasn't a neighbor. He was an invading force. He was new money, loud and arrogant, with a fleet of expensive cars and a condescending smirk permanently etched on his face. The first thing he did was demolish the Hendersons' charming old farmhouse, tearing down a piece of local history to make way for what he called his estate. For a year, our lives were a living hell of construction noise, dust, and arrogant contractors who treated our quiet country lane like their personal parking lot. The result was a monstrosity, a sprawling, soulless mansion of glass and steel that loomed over my humble home, like a corporate headquarters. My wife, Mary, and I tried to be neighborly at first. We baked him a welcome pie. He answered the door, looked at the pie with disdain, and said, "My wife and I don't do carbs," before closing the door in Mary's face. That was the beginning and the end of our neighborly relations. The man was a walking personification of entitlement, a neighbor from God knows where. The real trouble began a month ago. I came home from a doctor's appointment to find a scene of utter chaos on my property. 2 surveyors were pounding stakes into the ground, and a construction crew was actively tearing up a 6-foot-wide swath of my land with a mini excavator. They were ripping through my lawn, my flower beds, and, to my horror, right through the middle of Mary's vegetable garden. A garden she had lovingly tended for over 40 years. A garden started by my own grandmother. I ran out, my heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and rage. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled over the roar of the machine. A foreman, a burly man with a clipboard, walked over. "New fence going up," he grunted, not making eye contact. "Property line is here now." "The hell it is," I said, pointing to the ancient towering oak tree 20 feet away. "The property line is marked by that tree. It's been the line for 70 years. Just then, Davenport himself strode out of his glass palace, wearing cashmere sweats and sipping from a delicate teacup. "Ah, George," he said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Having some issues? I had a new survey done. A modern, digital one. Turns out this little patch of weeds has been mine all along. My apologies for the discrepancy." He gestured to my wife's ruined garden, the uprooted tomato plants and crushed squash vines, and called them weeds. The insult was so profound, so dismissive, it momentarily stunned me into silence. "You can't do this, Alistair," I finally said, my voice shaking with anger. "This is my land. My wife's garden is here." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea and then looked me up and down, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "It was your wife's garden," he corrected me. "This is my land now, old man. I have a survey and a permit. Sue me if you don't like it. But I should warn you, my lawyers are very, very expensive." He turned and walked back toward his mansion, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my own property. Mary was heartbroken when she saw the garden. The sight of her crying over her ruined plants solidified a cold, hard sense of purpose in my stomach. Davenport had made a critical mistake. He assumed he was dealing with a simple old man. He assumed his money and his lawyers made him untouchable. He didn't know that my grandfather wasn't just a builder. He was a careful, borderline paranoid record keeper. And he had left me a treasure map. That night, instead of calling a lawyer I couldn't afford, I went up to the dusty finished attic. In the far corner, under a pile of old blankets, was my grandfather's old military footlocker. I hadn't opened it in 30 years. The hinges creaked as I lifted the heavy lid. The air filled with the smell of old paper and cedar. Inside, beneath his neatly folded uniform, was a collection of leather-bound ledgers and thick wax-sealed document tubes. This was my grandfather's legacy. This was my arsenal. I spent the entire night at the dining room table, a pot of strong coffee at my side, carefully unrolling and examining every document. And what I found was better than I could have possibly imagined. He hadn't just left me one secret. He had left me a series of them, a multi-layered trap for any arrogant fool who tried to mess with his land. The first document was the original 1958 deed and survey map for my property, certified by the county surveyor at the time, complete with hand-drawn landmarks and notarized signatures. It clearly showed the property line originating from the center of the old oak tree. It was a beautiful, legally binding piece of history that made Davenport's new digital survey look like a cheap forgery. This was my ace in the hole for the property line dispute. But there was more. I unrolled the document tube for the neighboring property, which my grandfather had apparently acquired a copy of for his records. And there it was, in the fine print of the original deed from when the Hendersons bought the land, a specific, long-forgotten easement. The easement granted my property permanent, unimpeded access to an old well located on the Hendersons, now Davenport's land. It was an old clause, likely for emergencies, but it was still legally on the books. And then I found the third document, the one that made me smile for the first time all day. It was a set of original construction permits and blueprints from the 1950s for a large, now-defunct septic system that had serviced the old Henderson farmhouse. I looked at the diagram, my engineer's mind immediately recognizing the layout. My grandfather had marked the location of the massive concrete tank with a neat X. I went to my office and pulled up the satellite view of Davenport's property on my computer. I overlaid the old blueprint with the new construction. The X was located directly, perfectly, under the foundation of Davenport's brand-new 3-car garage and guest house. Davenport's entire week had been a flurry of activity. The new 6-figure fence, a monstrous iron spear-tipped thing, was completed in a matter of days. He immediately had a team of landscapers come in and lay down expensive sod on his newly acquired 6 feet of land, right over the graves of Mary's tomatoes. He was marking his territory like an animal, confident in his victory. I watched it all from my window, and I waited. My revenge campaign began, not with a bang, but with a whisper. I drafted a polite, simple letter to Mr. Davenport. Dear Alistair, it read, I am writing to you regarding the access to the well located on your property, as specified in the utility easement on your deed. Page 4, paragraph 3. As you are aware, my property has a legal right of access. Your new fence, unfortunately, obstructs this access. Please let me know what your plan is, to provide me with a gate or other means of entry at your earliest convenience. Regards, George. It was a small legal jab, a test. I wanted to see how he would react. His response came 2 days later, not from him, but from his lawyer. It was dismissive, arrogant, and exactly what I had hoped for. Mr. Miller, the letter began, my client is under no obligation to entertain your frivolous and antiquated claims regarding a non-existent well. The so-called easement is a historical footnote with no legal standing. Please cease and desist your harassment of Mr. Davenport immediately. Any further communication on this or any other matter will be viewed as an act of aggression. Perfect. He had taken the bait. He had, in writing, acknowledged the existence of the well and denied me access. Now, I could proceed. My next letter was not to Davenport. It was a certified letter to the County Water and Soil Division, a regulatory body known for its bureaucratic zeal and absolute power. I wrote as a concerned citizen. To whom it may concern, I wrote, I have reason to believe that a potentially compromised abandoned well and a large, undecommissioned septic system from the 1950s may pose a significant environmental risk at the following address. The new owner has recently engaged in extensive construction and has denied access to the well, which may be a violation of county code. I would be grateful if you could investigate this potential threat to our local groundwater. I didn't have to wait long. The following Tuesday morning, 2 official county vehicles pulled up to Davenport's ornate iron gates. I watched from my kitchen window, coffee in hand, as 2 county inspectors, armed with clipboards and a look of grim purpose, demanded entry. Davenport, clad in a silk robe, came out to meet them, his face a mask of fury and indignation. I could see him waving his arms, pointing at my house, his voice a low, angry rumble even from a distance. The inspectors were unmoved. They had a warrant. For the next 4 hours, they swarmed his property. They had a team with them that used ground-penetrating radar. I watched them scan the area around his new guest house. I saw the moment they found it. The technician stopped, looked at his screen, and called over the lead inspector. They both stared at the screen, then looked at the brand-new $1 million guest house, then back at the screen. The lead inspector got on his phone. An hour later, he walked over to Davenport, who was pacing like a caged tiger on his pristine lawn, and handed him a piece of paper. Even from my window, I could see the bright red stamp at the top. It was a stop work order and a notice of violation. They had found the massive, 50-year-old concrete septic tank directly under the guest house's foundation. They had also found the old well. The entire structure was red-tagged, declared an illegal and unsafe building, effective immediately. Davenport was facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in costs to have the tank professionally and safely decommissioned and removed, a process that would require demolishing a significant portion of his new guest house and garage. But I was just getting started. As Davenport was standing there, staring at the red tag on his guest house, his perfect world beginning to crumble, another, more official-looking group of people arrived at his gate. This group wasn't in county trucks. They were in sedans from the state capitol. It was a team from the State Historical Preservation Society, accompanied by 2 professors of archaeology from the state university. This was the result of my trip to the county records office. While looking for the septic permits, I had stumbled upon something else, a piece of local history my grandfather had likely known about, but that had been lost to time. In the 1940s, before the land was officially subdivided, the original owner of the entire tract, a family named the Clyburns, had donated a small, unrecorded pre-colonial family cemetery on the property to the state's Historical Preservation Society. It was a tiny plot, maybe 20 by 20 feet, but under state law, it was protected ground. I had found the donation record, filed away and forgotten for 80 years. The location of this cemetery, according to the old maps, were right in the middle of where Davenport had just installed his new, Olympic-sized swimming pool and marble patio. A stern-looking woman from the Preservation Society presented a stunned Davenport with a court order. They had credible evidence of a protected historical site on his property, and were legally required to begin an immediate exploratory excavation to determine the boundaries of the cemetery, starting with his swimming pool. The next few weeks were a glorious symphony of chaos for Davenport. His multi-million-dollar property was no longer an estate. It was a full-blown environmental cleanup and an archaeological dig site. Heavy machinery moved in, not to build, but to destroy. They drained his pool. They tore up his expensive Italian marble patio. They began the slow, painstaking process of digging up his entire backyard, searching for headstones. His wife reportedly went to stay at their summer home in the Hamptons, unable to bear the humiliation. With his world in turmoil, it was time for my final move, the one that started it all. I took my grandfather's original, certified 1958 survey map and filed a simple property line dispute with the county. It was an open and shut case, faced with an original, notarized survey versus Davenport's new self-serving one. The county sided with me in a matter of days. A legal order was issued, forcing Davenport to bear the full cost of tearing down his brand new 6-figure iron fence and moving it back 6 feet to the correct, original property line. And here is the final beautiful twist, the most delicious piece of this entire saga. That 6 feet of land that I reclaimed, the land that had once been my wife's garden, contained the main utility access junction for Davenport's entire property, his water main, his gas line, his fiber optic cable. When he'd built his mansion, the contractors had run everything right along the edge of what he thought was his property. Now, that access point was squarely, legally, and permanently back on my land. Last week, I had a new simple wooden fence installed along my true property line. It's not as fancy as his iron monstrosity, but it's perfect. It encloses the junction box, completely. According to the law, he can still access his utilities for emergency repairs, but he has to get my written permission every single time. And I can legally charge him a reasonable access fee for the inconvenience. His utility bills are now subject to my personal approval. The power dynamic had been permanently, gloriously, reversed. Davenport, a broken and defeated man, tried to confront me yesterday as I was tilling the soil for Mary's new garden. He looked haggard, a decade older than he had a month ago. You've ruined me," he stammered, his voice weak. "This is going to cost me millions." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just leaned on my shovel, looked at the new fence, and then looked at him. "My property ends here, Alistair," I said, my voice even and calm. "Please have a good day." I went back to my work, and he just stood there for a long time before turning and shuffling back to the wreckage of his arrogant dream. My grandfather had always told me, "Land is the only thing that lasts, son. Know your land, respect it, and never let a bully take a single inch." Davenport had tried to take 6 feet, and in the end, it cost him everything. My wife's garden is already starting to grow back, more beautiful than ever,